Excuse me. I think you're in my seat.
I don't think so. This is my seat.
Ma'am, my boarding pass is for 2A. Please check yours.
I'm not moving.
I have my boarding pass. It says 1A. I'm not going anywhere.
Ashley, bring me the cabin manifest, the printed copy, now.
Yes, right away.
Hand it over.
Here it is.
And the first thing you need to know is that Elias Jerome Webb was standing in the aisle of a first-class cabin with a boarding pass that said 1A, and there was a woman sitting in seat 1A who was not him, and she was looking at him the way people look at something they have already decided is not their problem. And that is where this story begins. Everything before it is just explanation, but explanations matter. So here is one. And Detroit, 1992. The shoe store on Gratiot Avenue smelled like rubber and floor wax. Elias was 14, skinny, in the way teenagers are skinny when they are about to stop being skinny. He was wearing his good jacket, and the one his mother ironed on Sunday nights. The one with no holes in the collar she pressed flat because it mattered, because she knew what the world did with the details it found. He was not doing anything. That was the part that stayed with him. And 32 years later, standing in the aisle of a plane, that part was still the one he came back to. He had been looking at a pair of sneakers on the middle shelf. Just looking, and the way any kid looks at something he wants and knows he probably cannot afford, but looks anyway, because looking is still free, and nobody has figured out how to charge for it yet. The store manager appeared from nowhere. Big guy, red polo shirt, and name tag that said Dave. Dave did not ask if Elias needed help, did not say excuse me, just appeared at his shoulder like a shadow that had learned to breathe, stood there, close enough that Elias could smell coffee and something sour underneath it. Can I help you with something? And the way he said it did not mean, can I help you? Elias was 14, and he already knew that. Already knew the difference between a question that was a question and a question that was a wall, and he set the sneaker down, slow and careful. The way you set something down when you know hands are watching, even if you cannot see them. He turned around, looked Dave in the eye, said nothing, because he had already understood at 14 that anything he said would be used, and Dave crossed his arms. Elias walked out, not running, not crying, walking. Even though his chest felt like something was sitting on it, even though his face was hot in a way that had nothing to do with the weather outside, and his father was on the sidewalk. Leander Webb, tall man, quiet man, the kind of man who took up space without demanding acknowledgement for it. He looked at his son's face and understood the whole story without a word. He did not go back inside, did not cause a scene, and did not make promises about a world that would be different someday. He put one hand on the back of Elias's neck, steady, warm. Don't let them see you run, he said. And you run, you lose before you even start. That was it. Elias was 14 years old, and he filed that sentence below his ribs, in the place where a person stores the things they know they are going to need, and he did not know he would need it 32 years later, and standing in a first-class cabin, and boarding pass in hand, and while a woman in a white blouse looked at him, and decided something that was not true, but that is how it works. And you carry things before you know what they are for. Atlanta, 32 years later, the folder on Elizas's desk was thin. That was the problem. A thick folder meant variety, meant scattered incidents, and meant you could point to this case and that one and say, look, and different circumstances, and different days, and no pattern here. And this folder was thin because every complaint in it was the same story. 47 of them, 6 months, first class only. He had requested the raw files, not the summary, and his head of compliance had sent summaries first, and Elias had sent them back. He wanted the actual forms. And the handwritten ones, the scanned emails, the audio transcripts from the customer line that print 6 of someone had printed out and highlighted, and then stopped highlighting because after the 3rd page, the highlighting stopped meaning anything. He read them all, not because he doubted them, and he read them because they deserved to be read. Because the woman from Cincinnati who wrote in careful cursive deserved someone to read every word she had chosen. And because the man from Houston who filed his complaint 10 days after the flight 10 days, and which meant he had sat with it, and had thought about whether to bother, and had decided to bother deserved to have that decision honored. And because the retired schoolteacher who ended hers with 5 words deserved those 5 words to land somewhere. I just wanted to sit down. He read that 4 times. He was the CEO of Apex Airways, and he had built this company from a regional carrier with 6 planes and a borrowed conference room into one of the largest domestic airlines in the country. And 17 years, 40,000 employees. He had a face on the annual report and a voice at industry conferences and a list of accomplishments that took up 2 pages when his communications team put it together for award nominations. He had done all of that, and in the first-class cabin of his own airline, on routes he had personally approved, people who looked like him were being pushed out of seats they had paid for and told to find somewhere else. And his head of HR presented a plan, quiet review, internal retraining, a revised protocol memo distributed to crew leads, maybe a town hall, depending on reception. She used the phrase proactive culture shift. She used it 3 times. The deck had charts, and Elias listened to the whole thing. Then he closed the folder. "I'm going to audit it myself," he said. The room went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when someone has said something that changes the next several months of everyone's calendar. "And sir, the optics of book me a seat," Elias said. "Coach name, no title, flight 714, Atlanta to New York, first class." His assistant opened her mouth. He was already standing up, and the morning of the flight, Elias dressed the way he dressed when he was not performing anything. Dark jeans, clean gray hoodie, white sneakers, not expensive ones, just clean and without scuffs. The watch his father had left him, black strap, nothing flashy, and he looked like a man going somewhere. And not a man going somewhere important, just somewhere. He checked in on his phone under eWeb. No designation, no executive flag in the system, no note in the crew tablet that said handle with care, just a name and a seat number, 1A. And he had reserved it under the audit protocol, a process only 3 people in the company knew existed. The seat would appear booked to a standard passenger, but the serial code in the confirmation was tied to his executive access. And a safety net he had built 18 months ago for exactly this purpose and had never used until now. He did not plan to need it today. He hoped he would not need it. He took a rideshare to the airport, sat in the back, and the driver talked about the Hawks game for 11 minutes, and Elias said, "Yeah, in the right places," and looked out the window at Atlanta going past. He thought about the 47 people, the careful cursive, and the 10-day wait before filing. The 5 words at the end, "I just wanted to sit down." He stood in the regular security line, put his shoes in the gray bin, watched the conveyor, and collected his things on the other side, and found a coffee near the gate, and sat alone with it for 20 minutes. Nobody looked twice at him, which was the point, and which was also, depending on how the next few hours went, going to be either a relief or a confirmation of something he did not want confirmed. And Flight 714 boarded at 7:40 a.m. Elias stood in the priority lane. Hoodie, jeans, boarding pass in hand, the way you hold it when you have nothing to hide because there is nothing to hide. The gate agent scanned his ticket without looking up, and the jetway smelled like recycled air. He walked down the narrow corridor and turned the corner and stepped into the first-class cabin. Stopped. Seat 1A was occupied. A woman, white, mid-50s, and dressed in the way that costs money without announcing it. Silk blouse, dark trousers, a bag in the overhead that had its own kind of quiet authority. And she was already settled, shoes off. A glass of pre-departure sparkling water balanced on the armrest. Reading glasses on, phone in hand. She looked like she had been sitting there since the plane was assembled. Elias looked at his boarding pass, looked at the seat, and looked at the woman. He stepped forward. "Excuse me, I think you're in my seat." She did not look up immediately. She finished what she was reading. Then she lowered her phone, looked at him, and head to toe. Unhurried, the way a person takes their time when they have never once been rushed by anything. "I'm sorry," her voice was pleasant. That was the first thing he noticed. It was genuinely pleasant, and the tone of someone who has spent decades being correct and has the smoothness that comes from never being seriously challenged. "Seat 1A, Elias said. He held up the boarding pass. "That's mine." She smiled, just slightly, and the kind of smile that does not reach the eyes because it is not really a smile, and it is a door being closed politely. "I've been in this seat since the gate opened," she said. "I think there might be some confusion, sweetheart." Sweetheart. He did not react to the word. He heard it, stored it, set it beside everything else he was already watching, And there's no confusion, he said. 1A, I'd appreciate it if you could check your ticket. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked past him, like he was already resolved, and like the situation had already sorted itself out in her mind, and all that was left was for the physical reality to catch up. She did not check her ticket. The flight attendant appeared, Ashley Grant, 27 years old, 3 years with Apex Airways, and hair pulled back, and uniform pressed, and smile applied the way certain things are applied every morning, not real, and not fake, and just maintained. And she stepped into the space between Elias and the woman, facing Elias. Sir, can I help you with something? And not can I help resolve this? Not let me take a look at what's happening here. Just the sir and the question. There was not really a question. Elias held up his boarding pass, seat 1A. Ashley looked at it, less than a second, then back at him. And this section is for Priority Platinum members, she said, her voice even and practiced. Do you have your Platinum confirmation? I have my boarding pass, Elias said, which says 1A. And sometimes there are system errors at the gate, and Ashley said, and already pivoting slightly toward the back of the plane, and already redirecting the conversation with her body before her words had finished landing. And I'd be happy to help you find your correct seat. Your correct seat. Behind Elias, a man in a business suit brushed past and settled into 1C without anyone asking him a single thing. No Platinum confirmation, no questions at all, just a man sitting down in a seat, and Elias noticed. He noticed everything. That was what he was there to do. I'd like you to verify the boarding pass, Elias said. Before we discuss anything else, Ashley's smile did not move, but something behind it tightened, and the particular tension of a situation not behaving the way it is supposed to. And the woman in 1A, her name was Carol Hutchins, and though Elias did not know that yet, and would learn it from the manifest later, and Carol Hutchins, and regional director, and 18 years of platinum status, Carol reached into her bag and pulled out her phone, and did not rush. She never rushed. I fly this route every other week, she said, to no one specific, to the air, to the cabin as a collective, 18 years. I know where my seat is. Ashley gave the smallest nod. Not perceptible unless you were watching for it, and the ghost of an agreement. We are on the same side. Elias saw it. He said nothing. Derek Okafor came out of the galley, 41 years old, 12 years with Apex Airways, and head of the first-class cabin on this route for the last 4. He knew this plane the way people know their own kitchens, which overhead bins stuck, where the ice machine jammed, which seats had armrests that squeaked under pressure. And he also knew, the moment he stepped out and read the posture of 3 people near 1A, exactly what's happening. You develop a sense for it. Work long enough in spaces where certain things happen with certain frequency, and you stop needing words, and you read shoulders. You read the position of a flight attendant relative to a passenger. You read the air. Derek read it all in about 4 seconds. He looked at the man in the gray hoodie, looked at Ashley, and looked at Carol Hutchins settled into 1A like she had always been there and always would be. He had a choice. He had made choices like this before. Small ones, private ones, and the kind nobody writes about because nothing dramatic happened, because someone just quietly did the easier thing and went back to their work, and the day continued, and the easier thing got a little more grooved in, and a little more automatic, and each time. And Derek turned around, went back into the galley. The door swung shut behind him. Elias was watching when it happened, not with anger, something that sat below anger, something colder and more useful, and because Derek's disappearance told him something the 47 complaints had suggested but not confirmed. It was not just about individual crew members making individual bad calls. It was about a system that made the easier thing easy enough that people with 12 years of experience chose it without a moment's hesitation. And that was what a system looked like from the inside. He had his answer, or part of it. He became aware of the man in row 3, not because the man did anything noticeable. The opposite. The man was conspicuously uninvolved in a way that required effort. Laptop open and coffee steaming, both hands on the keyboard, eyes on the screen. James Whitmore, 63 years old, silver hair, a suit that had been good for 20 years because quality does not require trends, and he had served on the Apex Airways board of directors for 9 years, had sat across from Elias in more conference rooms than either of them could count. and had eaten dinner with him 3 months ago at a restaurant in Midtown where the salmon was overpriced and the conversation had been better. Laptops do not require stillness, and they do not require the kind of alert, careful stillness that James Whitmore currently had in his shoulders. The alertness of someone paying very close attention to something while performing the act of seeing nothing at all. And Elias looked at him. James looked up. Just for a moment, their eyes met. 3 seconds, maybe 4, long enough to be unmistakable. James gave a small nod, the nod that said, "I see you." Then he looked back at his screen and did not move. Elias looked away, looked at the aisle, and looked at the boarding pass in his hand. He thought about James's vote 6 weeks ago when the board had reviewed the complaint summary. He had been in that meeting and had watched the slides, had heard the recommendation to address it internally, had seen the board members nod and move to the next agenda item. 8 minutes, 47 complaints addressed in 8 minutes. He thought about that vote now, and about what it felt like to be acknowledged and then watched and then left standing. He stored it, right there beside Sweetheart, right there beside Derek's back going through a door. 5 rows back, in seat 5B, Jordan Price was supposed to be finishing an outline, and she was 22 years old, senior year. Communications major with a sociology minor, because she could not choose between them and her advisor told her life is short. Jordan, just do both. And she had a midterm paper due in 10 days and had boarded this flight specifically intending to use it. The outline was untouched. Jordan had been watching the front of the cabin since before the door closed, and shot the way she had been trained to watch by 4 years of studying how stories move, not just what was happening, but the structure of it, the positions of people, the weight distribution of a room, and she pressed record, not live streaming, not posting. Just the reflex of someone who had been in enough situations where she wished she had evidence. She had learned. She texted her roommate a 20-second clip with one line, "You need to see this, and something's happening on my flight." Her roommate would read that text in 4 minutes, would watch the clip twice, would show the girl down the hall, and the girl down the hall would know exactly where to post it and what to say when she did. And Jordan did not know any of that yet. She kept the phone low and kept watching. And, at the front of the cabin, and Ashley had reached the boundary of her professional patience and her what she believed was her authority, and which were 2 different things she had not yet been taught to distinguish. "And sir," she said, sharper now, by 1 degree, "I'm going to ask you one more time to find your assigned seat in the rear of the cabin." "I have found my assigned seat," Elias said, "and it's 1A. I'm standing in front of it." Carol set her sparkling water down with a soft click. "This is getting ridiculous," she said. "Still pleasant. Always pleasant. I've had this seat confirmed for 3 weeks. Elias looked at her. "May I see your boarding pass?" She blinked, and the question landed like something in a language she did not quite speak. "Excuse me?" "Your boarding pass," Elias said. "If you've had the seat confirmed for 3 weeks, it should say 1A. And the cabin had gone to a particular kind of quiet, the kind where people are doing things with their hands while listening to every word. A woman 2 rows back had been turning the same page for 90 seconds, and the man in 2C had stopped scrolling 3 minutes ago and had not started again. Carol reached into her bag, found her phone, opened the Airline app, and the screen faced away, but Elias could see her eyes, and he saw the exact moment they found what they were looking for, and then found what they had not been expecting, and she lowered the phone. "It says 1B, she said. Her voice had changed by 1 fraction, the pleasantness still present, but the foundation of it had shifted, and the certainty that had been doing all the structural work underneath it had moved, and the pleasantness was now sitting on something less stable. 1B, Elias said. "There must be a system error," Carol said, and she believed it. That was the thing Elias could see even in that moment, and she genuinely believed it. And because the alternative that she was wrong, that the man in the gray hoodie had been right from the beginning, and that she had settled into a seat that was not hers, and defended it did not fit inside any story she had ever told herself about who she was and how she moved through the world. "And the system isn't mistaken," Elias said. Ashley stepped between them. "We're delaying the departure," she said. "I need you to come with me, sir. And if necessary, I will call don't." The voice came from the galley doorway. Derek had come back. Something had pulled him out. And he would explain it later, in an office in New York. as a sound equality to the silence, the cabin that reached him through the galley door, and told him that the moment had changed while he was hiding from it, and that whatever he was protecting himself from was already here, and the galley door was not, in fact, protection. And he stepped out. He looked at Elias, then at the boarding pass still in Elias's hand. He stepped forward, reached out. "May I see Derek?" And Ashley's voice was firm in the way that carries 12 years of, this is how things work between people in the same crew, on the same route with the same unspoken hierarchy. "I have this." Derek stopped. One step. That was all he had managed. And one step forward before the infrastructure of how things were done stopped him. And he knew it was wrong. He had known it before he went into the galley the first time. He stood there with one step between him and the right thing, and the familiar weight of all the reasons not to take it pressing down on him from above. "I'll get the gate agent," he said, and to no one specifically, and he went back. Elias watched the door swing closed a second time. "Don't let them see you run." He was not running, and he had no intention of running. And he was standing in the aisle of flight 714 with a boarding pass that had his name on it, and he was going to stand there for as long as it took, because there were 47 people who had not been able to stand there, and someone had to, and Ashley made the call. She stepped to the forward galley and spoke quietly into the crew phone and used the words passenger disruption. Elias heard it clearly, and he had said perhaps 40 words, had raised his voice 0 times, had not touched anything that was not his. He had declined to be moved from a seat he had paid for. That was the disruption. The plane was full now, door closed, and morning light came through the oval windows at the low angle of early Atlanta morning. Someone 2 rows back was already asleep with a neck pillow, and a woman across the aisle was looking out the window with the focus of someone who has decided very firmly that they are not involved. And Elias thought about all of them, all these witnesses. He thought about how many flights they had each been on, how many times someone had looked out that window. Carol picked up her sparkling water. "I'm sure this will get sorted out," she said to Ashley, not to Elias, and like he was an item, like he was something on a list that would be dealt with in due course by the appropriate people. Elias looked at her, not with contempt, and something more patient than contempt. And he was reading her, the way he read everything, not just the behavior but the history underneath it, and the accumulated years of experience that had taught a person to respond to certain informations in a certain way without ever questioning whether the response was built on something true. And what had Carol Hutchins been told? By whom? For how long? That when a man in a gray hoodie stood in front of her with a boarding pass, her brain had no available option except he must be in the wrong place, and he understood it. That was what kept him still. Not the calm of someone who did not care, the calm of someone who understood too much. Jordan Price had been in enough seminars to recognize what she was looking at. She had written papers about exactly this, and the mechanics of assumption. The architecture of a system that harms people not through dramatic villains, but through 1,000 ordinary people, making 1,000 ordinary choices in 1,000 ordinary moments. She kept recording, and James Whitmore had not moved. Laptop still open now. Every inch of his body arranged to communicate, "I am working, this is not my situation. I am simply a man on an airplane getting from one city to another." His eyes moved once, to Elias, and stayed for 3 seconds. Moved back. 3 seconds. James had known Elias Webb for 9 years. Had been in the room 6 weeks ago when the board reviewed 47 complaints and addressed them in 8 minutes and moved to the next agenda item, and had voted with the rest of them. Had nodded at the phrase internal resolution. Had eaten salmon with Elias at a midtown restaurant and talked about industry trends and their respective kids and the difficulty of finding a good tailor in the city anymore. And he had known who was standing in that aisle the moment Elias turned the corner. He had thought about saying something, had formed the beginning of a thought, about standing up, about saying to Ashley, "Hold on," about doing the simple and entirely possible thing. And then he had thought about Carol Hutchins, and who was also a passenger, and also a person, and about the scene, and about how he did not have full information, and about how it was not really his situation. And those thoughts had taken about 4 seconds. At the end of 4 seconds, James Whitmore had opened his laptop. He was not a bad person. He had spent 31 years being good at his job and generous with his expertise and present in the right rooms. and he sat on 7 boards. He mentored, he gave to things that mattered. He had, in 4 seconds, decided that this particular thing was not his to give to. Elias had watched him make that decision, had watched the exact moment the calculation resolved, and James looked away, and he was not surprised. That was the part he came back to. He was not surprised, and the absence of surprise was its own kind of data, the kind that ended up in reports. And Officer Diana Reeves came through the boarding door at 8:02 a.m., 44 years old, 12 years in airport security, 6 of them at Hartsfield-Jackson. And she had to the walk of someone who knows a space, completely not rushed, not casual, just present in the way that comes from having been somewhere long enough to understand it. She took in the scene at 1A in about 4 seconds, and man in gray hoodie aisle, and boarding pass visible, and posture contained and deliberate, and woman in 1A, settled, performing calm with the focused energy of someone who needs the performance to hold. Flight attendant between them, smile still operating, visibly relieved by the arrival of backup. Diana walked toward them. Officer Reeves. To no one specific, and just her name in the air, establishing her presence. She looked at Ashley. What's the situation? Passenger is refusing to move from first class. Diana looked at Elias. Can I see your boarding pass, sir? And he handed it to her. She read it, not scanned it. Read it. Name, seat assignment, confirmation number, flight number, date it. All of it, the way a person reads something when they actually intend to know what it says. Then she read it again. Then she reached for the scanner at her belt and ran the barcode. The scanner beeped. She looked at the screen. Her face did not change. And Diana Reeves had developed a face for work over 12 years that gave nothing away because everything went differently depending on how she reacted, and she had learned to let situations be what they were before she told anyone what she thought about them. But her hand stopped, just briefly, just for the time it took to understand what the screen was showing her. A flag, small, blue, and an executive-level audit code, the kind she had seen exactly twice in 12 years, both times connected to matters above her clearance level that had been referred up and handled by people above her. This was the 3rd time. She stood with it for a moment, turned it over, and let it tell her what it was saying. And then she lowered the scanner and looked at Ashley Grant with the straightforward directness of someone who has decided what the next 60 seconds are going to look like. Why hasn't this passenger been seated? Ashley opened her mouth, closed it, and there was a "I asked why," Diana said. Not what happened. Why? Ashley did not have an answer for that. Why was a different question than what she could explain, and why required her to look at a set of decisions she had made, without examining them, and explain the logic underneath. And there was no logic she could say out loud. Diana looked at Carol, then at Elias, then at the boarding pass in her hand. "Sir," she said, "I need you to stay exactly where you are for a moment." She reached for her radio, and Elias felt something shift in his chest. Not relief, and too early for that, but something. The ground under him had become, for the first time since he stepped onto this plane, marginally more solid, and he stood still, boarding pass in hand, not running. He had never been running. The engines hummed at low power below them. Through the oval windows, the Atlanta tarmac was bright with morning, and somewhere in the rows behind him, Jordan Price had her phone angled carefully, and the recording was still going. And an Elias Jerome Webb stood in the aisle of Flight 714 and did what his father had told him to do on a sidewalk in Detroit in 1992, and he held his ground. He waited for what came next. He did not let them see him run. Diana Reeves did not put her radio away immediately. She held it at her side the way a person holds something when they are still deciding what the next 60 seconds are going to cost, and she looked at the scanner screen one more time. The flag was still there, small blue, and the kind of marker that did not appear in the standard passenger database, did not show up on the crew tablet, did not exist anywhere in the system that a gate agent or flight attendant would ever have reason to access. And she had seen it twice before. And both times she had called her supervisor and been told to stand down, and airline matter, and not your jurisdiction, and thank you, Officer Reeves. And this was the 3rd time. She made a different calculation. She looked at Elias, at the boarding pass, at the way he was standing, not the posture of someone who was wrong and knew it and was hoping nobody noticed, and the posture of someone who had been standing in a specific kind of patience for a very long time and had not run out of it yet. And she looked at Ashley Grant, and hands clasped in front of her, and smile still running on some automatic setting, waiting for Diana to make the situation resolve the way situations were supposed to resolve. And she looked at Carol Hutchins in 1A, who had picked her phone back up in the deliberate way people pick phones up when they want to signal that a matter is beneath their continued attention. Diana said, "Ashley, bring me the cabin manifest, please." Ashley blinked, and the manifest, passenger list, seat assignments, the printed copy from your crew packet. "I have the app on my printed copy," Diana said, and nothing after it. Ashley turned and went to the forward galley. Carol lowered her phone. "Is this really necessary?" she said. And yes, Diana said. One word, no elaboration. Because it was, and because Carol Hutchins did not require an explanation from Diana Reeves, and Diana Reeves knew that and said the one word anyway. And the cabin had stopped breathing in the way it had been pretending to breathe. Nobody was performing indifference anymore. The man in 2C had his tablet flat on the tray table, screen dark, and the woman in 4A who had been looking out the window was now looking at the window without seeing it. Jordan Price in 5B had not moved her phone. Ashley came back with the printed sheet. One page, seat grid, names in small print beside each number, and she handed it to Diana the way you hand something. Someone when you have just begun to suspect it does not contain what you need it to contain. Diana found 1A immediately. Webb E. She looked at the boarding pass in her other hand. E. Webb, seat 1A, and she looked back at the manifest. Found 1B, Hutchins, C. She handed the manifest back to Ashley. Did not say anything, just handed it back and watched Ashley's eyes find the page and find the two names and understand what they meant. And the smile did not, it did. "There may have been a check-in error," Ashley said. "At the gate," Diana said. "Or on the plane." "Ah, yes, one of those." Ashley. Diana's voice stayed level, not unkind, precise in the way that a scalpel is precise. And, "Why did you ask this passenger to move without checking his boarding pass?" Silence. Not thinking silence. Knowing silence. There was a situation, and I thought, "Did you check the boarding pass?" And the question sat in the air. "No," Ashley said. One syllable, 4 letters. And it landed in that cabin like something dropped from a significant height, because everyone who had been pretending not to listen heard it clearly and understood exactly what it meant. And she had not checked. She had simply decided, had looked at Elias Webb standing in the aisle of first class and made a determination about where he belonged without looking at a single piece of evidence. And Carol Hutchins set her phone down on the armrest very carefully. Elias had not moved. He was watching all of it, not with the expression of someone scoring points, and with the expression of someone collecting data that was going exactly where he had expected it to go and finding no satisfaction in being right. He reached into the front pocket of his hoodie and took out his phone. He did it without announcement and without looking at anyone for permission or for reaction. And the screen came on. And he opened an application that did not appear on any customer-facing Apex Airways interface, that could not be downloaded by any passenger, that existed behind 3 layers of authentication and a biometric confirmation his security team had spent 18 months building. And the background was dark, white text. The Apex Airways logo small in the upper left, because this was not designed to be impressive. It was designed to function. At the top of the screen, in plain text, Audit Protocol Active, and Flight 714, Authorization, Executive Level 1. Below that, a dashboard. Crew Assignments, Passenger Manifest. Incident Log with a live timestamp updating every 30 seconds. And in the upper right corner, the same size as everything else because it did not need to be large to carry weight, CEO Elias Jerome Webb. He held the phone at his side, not thrusting it forward, not performing with it, and just holding it the way you hold something when the time to show it has arrived. And he looked at Carol Hutchins. She was already looking at him. Had been since Diana asked Ashley the question that undid the room. And Carol's face had moved through several configurations in the last few minutes, the practiced calm, the mild irritation of someone whose comfort has been disrupted, the particular patience of a person accustomed to being right, and had arrived somewhere new, and somewhere without a name for it yet, because she had not been here before. Elias turned the phone toward her, and he did not speak. He let her read it. She read it once. He could see her eyes move, could see her reach the end and go back to the beginning the way you do when what you have read does not fit the story you have already decided is true. She laughed, short, involuntary, and the laugh that escapes before the brain can catch it. You downloaded a fake app? Her voice was still pleasant, still had the register of someone who has never truly been in a situation they could not reframe. But there was something different in it now. A thinness, a wall made of paper, doing the work of a wall made of something more solid and beginning to show the effort. Elias looked at her. I didn't download anything, he said. He pressed the call button on the screen, and the cabin was quiet enough that everyone heard the ringtone. Once, twice. Then Apex Airways Legal and Compliance, Sylvia Horn speaking. Elias said, Sylvia, this is Elias, and I need you to initiate a full audit report for Flight 714, Atlanta to New York, this morning's departure, and crew names, badge numbers, and work history for all first-class staff. Incident log started immediately, and time stamped from boarding. I also need the prior incident records for Seat 1A on this route pulled and attached. A pause of 2 seconds. Yes, sir. Initiating now. And do you want external legal counsel flagged? Not yet. Alert the compliance team and the HR director. Tell them to be available when I land. Understood. Anything else? That's all for now. And he ended the call. The cabin did not make a sound, not a shift of weight, not a cleared throat, not the soft rustle of someone turning a page. And every person in first class was completely still in the way people are still when they have understood that the ground they were standing on has moved without their permission, and they are waiting to find out what they are standing on now. Ashley Grant's hands had come unclasped, and they hung at her sides, which was somehow more revealing than the clasped professional posture, and less managed, more human, more frightened. Carol Hutchins was no longer performing anything. Her face had arrived at a place that had no performance available because the stage had collapsed underneath it. And she was just a woman sitting in a seat, the wrong seat, and as it turned out holding a phone she had stopped reading, and looking at a man she had categorized in the first 3 seconds of seeing him, and was now, and too slowly, and recategorizing entirely, and the app, and the call to legal. The woman on the other end saying, yes, sir, without hesitation or confusion, or the slight pause of someone who needs to check whether this person has the authority they are claiming. And the pieces were arranging themselves in Carol's mind the way they arrange themselves when you do not want them to. Not one by one, all at once. Into a picture she could not look away from and could not unsee. James Whitmore, in 3A, closed his laptop, and not with drama, just quietly, and sat very still with his hands flat on the tray table and looked at nothing in particular. Diana Reeves had been doing the kind of math she was good at, not numbers, people, situations, and the shape of information when you step back far enough to see it whole. The audit flag on the scanner, the call to legal, the way Sylvia Horn said, yes, sir, and the calm on Elias's face, not the performed calm of someone bluffing their way through something, not the fragile calm of someone barely holding it together, and the calm of someone who had walked onto this plane already knowing what he was going to find and had found it. She looked at Elias directly. Sir, I want to make sure I understand the situation correctly. Are you an Apex Airways executive? I'm the CEO, Elias said. And the way you say, I'll take the window seat. Plain, accurate. Not braced for impact, because there was no reason to brace. It was simply the truth, and the truth did not require decoration. And Diana nodded. Once, the nod of someone filing information in the correct location. She looked at Ashley, at Carol. At the manifest in Ashley's hand with Hutchins, C printed cleanly beside 1B. At the boarding pass with Webb, E printed cleanly beside 1A. And going to need to document this, she said. Formally, document Ashley started. Formally, Diana, not an echo. A boundary. She radioed her supervisor and kept her voice flat and professional and reported exactly what she had found: an executive-level passenger flag, a confirmed seat discrepancy, a boarding pass that had not been verified prior to a removal attempt. And she used the word attempt carefully because Elias had not been removed, and she wanted the record to be precise about that. The attempt was real. The removal had not happened. Both facts mattered. Her supervisor asked if she needed additional officers, and Diana looked around the cabin. At Elias, still standing, holding his boarding pass with the same grip he had had on it since she arrived. At Ashley, reconfiguring. At Carol, sitting in a seat that the manifest said was not hers. And no, Diana said, I have it. She ended the radio call, looked at Carol. Ma'am, I need you to move to your assigned seat. Carol did not argue. There was nothing left to argue with. and she had held her position through pleasantness and certainty, and the practiced authority of someone who had never been wrong about where she belonged. And all of it had run directly into a manifest with 2 names and a phone call to legal, and a woman in a security uniform who read boarding passes before deciding what they said. And she gathered her things with the careful movements of a person trying to maintain some version of dignity inside a moment that had removed most of the available materials for it. Picked up the phone, collected the bag from under the seat, stood, moved to 1B without speaking, and Elias Jerome Webb sat down in seat 1A. It should have felt like something large, like a thing being restored, like justice or vindication, or at minimum the specific relief of a long-standing pressure released. And it felt like sitting down, which was the point. It was only ever supposed to feel like sitting down. And the fact that it had required all of this to feel like something that ordinary was the whole problem, and sitting down in it now did not solve that problem. It only illustrated it one more time. He buckled his seatbelt, put his phone on his knee, and looked out the window at the tarmac. The engines were warming. They were going to be late, and the captain had been notified. Diana had made a brief, careful call to the cockpit that Elias heard in pieces from where he sat. The flight plan would need adjusting. The gate agent would need to update the system, and small logistics of a disrupted morning falling into place around the larger thing that had happened. He thought about what came next, not what he would say, what he would do. He had learned early that these were different, and words were what people reached for when they wanted to feel like something had changed without paying the cost of changing it. And he had sat in enough board meetings and read enough internal memos and watched enough strongly worded emails dissolve into the same behavior they were supposed to address, and to know exactly how much a word was worth on its own, and not much. Without structure behind it, without consequence and accountability and systems redesigned from the mechanism outward, not much at all. Derek Okafor came out of the galley at 8:19 a.m. He had been in there for 17 minutes, and long enough to hear Diana's radio call through the aluminum wall, and long enough to understand that what he had walked away from 20 minutes ago had become something that the galley door could no longer contain. Long enough to have the conversation with himself that he had been avoiding since the moment he turned his back on the aisle. And he stepped out, looked at the cabin, Carol in 1B, Elias in 1A, Ashley near the glee curtain with the face of someone who has been in a minor accident, physically intact, thoroughly dislocated, and Diana filling out a form on her tablet. He looked at Elias. Elias looked back. The moment between them took 3 seconds in real time, and considerably longer than that from inside it. 12 years. That was what Derek was carrying into this moment, and 12 years of small calculations, each one reasonable in isolation, and each one adding up to something he had not fully accounted for until now, standing in the aisle of a plane he knew better than his own apartment, looking at a man he had watched get pushed out of a seat while he stood behind a door and waited for it to resolve itself, and he walked to 1A. "Mr. Webb," he said. Elias looked up at him. "I should have looked at your boarding pass," Derek said the first time. "Before I went into the galley, I saw what was happening and I made a choice not to be in it." He stopped, did not add anything, did not surround it with context or explanation, or the mitigating details that would have made it easier to say but less true. That was wrong, and Elias looked at him for a long moment. "You knew something was wrong when you came out the first time," he said. "Yes, you tried to look at the pass. Ashley stopped you. Yes. And then you went back in. Yes. Why?" Derek was quiet for a moment, not avoiding the question, and sitting inside it the way a question like that deserves to be sat inside. "Because Carol Hutchins has 18 years of platinum status," Derek said, "and because Ashley had already taken a position, because getting involved would have made things complicated in ways that last beyond one flight." He paused, "Because it was easier, and you knew it was easier," Elias said. "Yes, that's the part that goes in the report," Elias said, "and you understand that." "Yes, sir." They looked at each other for another moment. Two men with 12 years of Apex Airways between them and something that had just been said plainly that could not be unsaid. "And sit down for a minute," Elias said. Derek sat in the jump seat near the forward galley. Elias turns slightly in 1A to face him. Not a formal meeting, not a disciplinary conversation, something more direct than either of those. They talked, not long, not for an audience. Elias spoke about the 47 complaints and what they had in common and what they told him about the space between a person knowing something was wrong and a person doing something about it. And Derek listened. When Elias stopped, Derek said, "I've been on flights where that happened to me. Not fault on the job, just as a passenger." Elias said nothing, waited. "It felt like being told your ticket was wrong when you knew it wasn't," Derek said. "And like standing in a place you had a right to stand, and having the whole room act like the right was the problem." Elias said, "Then you knew exactly what he was feeling, and you walked away." And Derek did not answer that, because there was no answer that added anything to what Elias had just said. Elias looked back at the window. "Every one of those calculations you've made had a cost, Derek. You just didn't pay it. Someone else did. 47 times that I know of." And Derek sat with that. He sat with it the way you sit with something that is true and uncomfortable, and does not get less true or less uncomfortable the longer you look at it. And at 8:31 a.m., Elias's phone rang. He looked at the screen. His son, he answered. "Hey, Dad." Noah's voice came through. 19 years old, first year of college, and he had his father's low register and his mother's directness, and the particular quality of trying to sound calm that 19-year-olds have when they are not calm but think they should be. "I'm looking at Twitter right now." Elias had not been thinking about Twitter. "And there's a video," Noah said, "and of you, on a plane. It's Dad, it already has like 60, 70,000 people watching a live version, and there's another clip that someone clipped and that one has. Are you okay? What happened?" Elias opens his mouth to respond, and in the particular way that things happen on difficult mornings, not deliberately, not dramatically, just because his thumb found the wrong part of the screen while his hand was already holding 3 things at once. The speakerphone came on, and Noah's voice filled the cabin. "Because I'm looking at this, and there's a woman sitting in your seat, and a flight attendant telling you to move, and nobody is Dad. My roommate just sent me this." He goes, "Hey, is that your dad?" And I said, "I don't know. I'm trying to find out. And are you okay? Like actually okay?" 19 years old, trying very hard to be calm, not quite managing it. And because you are never quite as calm as you are trying to be at 19 when you are watching your father on the internet surrounded by people who have decided he is in the wrong place. And Elias said, "I'm fine, Noah. You're fine, like you always say you're fine or you're actually fine." The ghost of a smile. "Actually fine, because you don't have to be," Noah said, and his voice had changed, dropped, and the performing calm was gone and something more real had taken its place. "You don't have to be okay about this, Dad. You're allowed to be mad." The cabin was completely still. Every person in first class had stopped doing anything that was not listening, and not performing their non-involvement, just listening. Because what was coming through that speaker was not a CEO on a business call, not a powerful man managing a crisis. A father and his son, a 19-year-old telling his father that his feelings were permitted to exist, and you're allowed to be mad. Carol Hutchins had been looking at the seat back in front of her since she sat down in 1B. She stopped looking at it. Ashley Grant, near the galley curtain, pressed her lips together and looked at the floor, and James Whitmore stared at his hands flat on the tray table. Derek Okafor sat in the jump seat and looked at nothing, and thought about 47 people who had gone home and sat with something and decided it was worth writing down. Elias said, "I know I am." "Okay," Noah said, and a pause. "I love you, Dad. I love you too. Go to class. I'm literally in class right now. I'm hiding my phone under the desk." And then put it away. "I will after you tell me you're okay." "I'm okay." "Okay," another pause. "I'm proud of you." Elias held the phone, did not say anything for a moment. "Put your phone away," he said. Noah laughed. "Short and real. Yeah, okay, love you." The call ended, and the cabin stayed quiet in the way it had gone quiet, not the held breath quiet of before, not the performance of not listening, and something different. The quiet of a room full of people who had just been reminded of something they had been in the process of forgetting, that Elias Jerome Webb was a person, not a disruption, not a situation to be managed, not an agenda item, and a person with a son who called from class to ask if he was okay, a person who said "I love you" on a speakerphone in a first-class cabin and did not mind who heard it because there was nothing to mind, and he looked out the window. He thought about Dorothy from Cincinnati, who wrote in careful cursive and had almost not sent the complaint, who had sat with it for long enough to wonder if there was a point. He thought about the man from Houston who had waited 10 days, and about the schoolteacher and her 5 words. He thought about what the morning had confirmed. Not just the system was broken, he had known that, but how it was broken, and the specific texture of it. Ashley's reflexive decision. Derek's calculation in the galley. James's 4 seconds of reasoning that ended with a laptop opening. Carol's absolute certainty, built on nothing except decades of never being wrong, and none of them had woken up that morning intending to do what they did. That was what the folder had told him, and what the morning had shown him up close. It was not malice, it was habit, training, and the accumulated weight of small choices made by ordinary people who had never been asked to examine them, and that was harder to fix than malice. Malice was a thing you could point to. This was a thing you had to take apart piece by piece and rebuild differently. He already knew how he was going to start. James Whitmore got up from 3A at 8:44 a.m. He walked to 1A the way a man walks when he has spent time preparing something and has decided to stop preparing it and simply do it. He stood beside Elias's seat, and Elias, James said, "I owe you." James quietly, no heat, no sharpness, and just the word, and then a pause, and you sat 40 feet away, and you knew who I was. You could have ended this in 10 seconds. James looked at the floor, then back. "I know. I want the actual reason," Elias said. "Not a bored answer, not something for the record. Why didn't you say anything?" And James was quiet long enough that the quiet became an answer of its own kind. "And I didn't want a scene," he said, finally. The words heavy in a way that suggested he had been carrying them since 2 a.m. Elias nodded. "There was already a scene," he said. "You just weren't in it." James said nothing. "We'll talk when we land," Elias said. "Sit down." And James went back to 3A. He sat. He did not open his laptop again. He sat with his hands in his lap and looked at nothing and thought about 8 minutes, and about 47 complaints, and 8 minutes of board time, and a vote, and the next agenda item. He thought about how he had nodded at that vote. He thought about what nodding had cost. The seatbelt sign came on at a few minutes before 9 a.m. The delay had pushed them, and the captain came on with the standard apology. His voice had the particular calibration of someone who had been informed of exactly who was in 1A and was performing normalcy with professional precision. And the engines rose in pitch. The plane moved. Atlanta fell away below them, the sprawl of the city giving way to the flat green of Georgia in the early morning. Elias watched the ground drop. He thought about the report he was building, the timestamps, the crew actions, and the gap between procedure and what had actually happened. The audit log that Sylvia was populating in real time from Atlanta, and the prior incident records for seat 1A that he had asked her to pull 2 prior incidents, 2 prior passengers told to move, 2 names that would be in his inbox by the time he landed, and he thought about what accountability looked like when it was done correctly. Not for punishment. Punishment was the easy version, the version that let everyone feel like justice had been served without anything actually changing. Real accountability was slower, and it required staying in the room after the dramatic part was over. It required building something different in the place where the broken thing had been. He already knew what he was going to build. He had been thinking about it for 6 months, and since the first complaint had come in and he had read it and set it on his desk and thought, this is not going to be the last one. It had not been the last one. In row 5, Jordan Price had finally lowered her phone, not because the situation was over, and because her arm was tired and she had enough, and she was now reading what her roommate had sent back, which was a chain of texts that had become something she needed both hands and her full attention to process, and the clip her roommate had shared had been reposted by someone with a large following. That person's repost had been picked up by someone else, and, somewhere in that chain, someone had recognized Elias and posted his name. And now the comment sections were moving with the specific velocity of information that has found the right current. Jordan scrolled through it and stopped on a comment that a civil rights attorney had posted under one of the reposts. Watch this man's stillness. And that is not passivity. That is a choice. That is the most controlled and deliberate act in that cabin, and everyone around him is performing anger or confusion or indifference, and he is just standing there knowing exactly what he is doing. Jordan read it twice, and she looked at the man in 1A, and who was now sitting quietly, and looking at something on his phone, and the same quality of stillness he had had in the aisle, now translated into the settled version of it. She had 412,000 notifications. She turned her phone face down on her tray table and thought about her thesis, about the gap between what happens and what gets recorded and what gets believed, and about the difference between a story that becomes a moment and a moment that becomes the change. She thought about what Elias had said in the aisle earlier. Not to her, not to anyone directly, just something she had caught in a low exchange between him and Derek. And you didn't pay the cost. Someone else did. She opened a document on her phone and typed that sentence at the top of a blank page. Stared at it. Typed a second sentence below it. The question is whether the people who paid it got anything back, and she did not know yet how to answer that. But she thought that was probably the right question. The one the thesis was actually about, it had been about all along, and she had just needed to be on this particular flight to find the right words for it. And Ashley Grant appeared at Elias's seat at some point over South Carolina. She had not sent someone else, had not asked Derek to relay a message or waited until landing to deal with it through the formal channel. And she came herself, which was the first decision she had made all morning that was purely hers, uninfluenced by what someone else wanted or what the situation was supposed to require. She stood beside 1A, Mr. Webb, she said. He looked up. She had clearly decided on the way over that she was not going to rehearse it, that whatever she had prepared was going to come out wrong, and the only honest option was the unprepared version. I didn't look at your boarding pass, she said, and I made an assumption and I acted on it before I had any information to act on. She paused. I don't have a way to explain that doesn't make it worse. Elias watched her for a moment. And do you know how many times this happened on this route before today? He said. She shook her head. Twice, he said, that I know of. Different passengers. Same seat. Same sequence someone. In the wrong seat, no one checks the boarding pass. Someone gets told to move. He paused, and both times the person told to move was a passenger of color. Both times it went unreported by the crew. Ashley was quiet. The people who moved, Elias said, had exactly the same right to that seat that I had, and the same boarding pass, the same confirmation. The only difference between them and me today is that I didn't move. And the reason I didn't move has nothing to do with being the CEO. And I didn't move because I knew my boarding pass was correct, and I wasn't going to pretend otherwise. He let that sit. The CEO part, he said, is just what it took to make the room pay attention. Ashley's jaw tightened, not in anger, and in the effort of staying composed when composure is being tested from the inside. I understand, she said. You understand what happened, Elias said. That's different from understanding why. That's what the next several months are going to be for. She looked at him for a moment, and waiting to see if there was more. There was not right now. This was not the conversation. This was the beginning of it. She turned and walked back to the galley, and pulled the curtain closed behind her. She stood in the narrow space between the coffee service and the trash chute, trank with the engines loud through the walls, and thought about a woman from Cincinnati. She did not know about the woman from Cincinnati, and she did not know her name or her complaint or the 5 words at the end of it. But she thought about someone like her, some version of her, and a person who had flown this route and sat in this cabin, and been told by someone in this uniform, without evidence and without question, that they were in the wrong place. And she thought about what that felt like. She tried to feel it. It was the first time all morning she had tried to feel something from inside a perspective that was not her own. It was a start. Carol Hutchins did not speak for the rest of the flight, and she sat in 1B with her phone in her lap and did not pick it up, did not read, did not look at the other passengers. She looked at the clouds through the window, the same clouds Elias had looked at when the plane broke through them, and she thought, and she was not a person who doubted herself, had not built a career and a life and a reputation that spanned 18 years of platinum status on self-doubt. She had built it on certainty, on being the person in the room who knew what the situation was and acted accordingly. And she had been certain this morning. She had been so completely certain, and she was sitting in 1B. The man she had been certain about was in 1A, had been in 1A this whole time, as it turned out, in every way that mattered, and had had the boarding pass that said so since before he stepped on the plane, had been correct from the first moment she looked at him and decided, in some part of her brain that worked faster than conscious thought, and required no evidence that he was not, and she turned the certainty over in her mind, looked at it from the outside for the first time. What was it built on? That question was new. She had not asked it before because she had never needed to, and the certainty had always been correct, or had seemed correct, or had never been challenged in a way that required her to examine whether correct was actually what it was. She looked at the seat in front of her, and she thought about what it would feel like to fly this route for 18 years and be certain about things and never once have the certainty tested. How comfortable that would be, and how invisible the comfort would be, not something you noticed because you were in it, the way you do not notice the temperature of water you have been swimming in long enough. And she thought about a man in a gray hoodie, standing in an aisle holding a boarding pass and waiting for someone to read it. She thought about how long he had waited. The seatbelt sign came on. New York was ahead of them. Carol looked at the window and at the clouds breaking into the gray-green patchwork of the northeast below. She did not look away this time. She sat with what was in front of her, and she did not reach for her phone, and she did not find a way to resolve it into something more comfortable, and she let it be what it was, which was, as it turned out, the hardest thing she had done all morning. The wheels met the runway with the familiar jolt of landing, engines reversed, and the plane slowed through the noise of deceleration, and the runway lights came past the windows in a blur, and then steadied as they taxied toward the terminal. Flight 714, Atlanta to New York, 23 minutes late, and Elias looked at the gate ahead of them and thought about what he was going to build. And not a policy document, not a town hall, not a strongly worded internal memo that people would read and nod at and file in a folder. Something structural, something that changed the mechanism rather than describing the problem, and something the next crew on the next flight would not be able to opt out of simply by choosing the easier thing. The plane stopped, the seatbelt sign went off, and the cabin came back to life in the ordinary way of arrivals, people standing, bags pulled from overheads, the choreography of 100 people all needing to exit through one door. And Ashley was at the front, helping with bins, the professional smile reinstated at a different setting than before, present but not performing. Derek worked the aisle, not avoiding Elias's eye, not seeking it either, just there, doing the job. And James Whitmore stood in the aisle with his laptop bag and looked at Elias. Elias said, 4 o'clock, my office. James nodded. Carol was last to stand. She gathered her bag slowly. When she rose, she and Elias were briefly in the same line of sight, and she looked at him. He looked at her. She did not say anything. He did not say anything. She walked toward the door. Jordan Price was already up, coat over her arm, phone in hand, and she had 847 notifications she was not going to look at until she found somewhere quiet. She watched Elias over her shoulder as she moved toward the exit. He was the last first-class passenger, still seated, taking his time, and not performing the lack of hurry, and just not being in a hurry. And he sat in 1A until he was ready to stand, and when he was ready he stood, and he took his bag from the overhead and settled the strap on his shoulder and walked down the aisle of 714, the way his father had walked him out of a shoe store on Horatio Avenue, and not running, not for one step. The boarding door was open. The jetway was ahead. He walked through it, and the gate at JFK was not designed for what Elias needed to do next. It was designed for arrivals, for the ordinary motion of people collecting themselves after a flight, checking phones, finding exits, remembering which bag was theirs. And it had the fluorescent brightness of every airport in America, and the particular smell of recycled air and floor, cleaner, and somewhere nearby, coffee going stale in a pot. Nobody had checked in an hour. Elias found an empty cluster of seats near the window and sat down, set his bag between his feet, and started working. The first call was to Sylvia Horn. She had been monitoring the audit log since 8:19 a.m. She had the incident documented. Crew names, badge numbers, the team stamps from the boarding sequence, and the manifest notation confirming the seat discrepancy. And the prior incident records, he had asked her to pull 2 previous flights, seat 1A and same route, and 2 passengers who had been removed and had not been Elias Webb, and had not had the audit protocol on their boarding pass, and had gone to the back of the plane or off the plane entirely, and had eventually, and days or weeks later, and written something down in the hope that someone would read it. And walk me through the prior incidents, Elias said. Sylvia pulled them up. First incident 7 months ago. Passenger in 1A asked to move to economy. No boarding pass verification documented. Crew lead on that flight was not Derek Okafor. Different crew, same behavior. And second incident 4 months ago. Passenger in 1A, same sequence. No verification. Passenger complied after being told security would be called. Both passengers had filed complaints. And both complaints had been received by the customer relations team, logged and assigned to a review queue, and then resolved with a form letter and a voucher for $200 off a future flight. And neither had triggered a crew review. Neither had been escalated. Neither had reached his desk. Who handles complaint escalations? Elias said. Sylvia named the process, the automated routing system, the tiered review structure, and the threshold for escalation, 3 complaints involving the same crew member within 60 days. These 2 complaints involved different crew members, Sylvia said. So the system didn't flag them as related. They involved the same seat, Elias said. And the system doesn't route by seat, Sylvia said. And it routes by crew member. Elias sat with that for a moment. That's the first thing we're fixing, he said. He heard Sylvia writing. What's the media situation? Large, Sylvia said. Not negative. And the framing has been Renata can give you the full picture. But from what I'm seeing, the story isn't about the airline. It's about you. About the way you handled it. The video that's circulating most is the one of you standing in the aisle and not moving. And how many views? As of 20 minutes ago, the clip on the largest account had passed 400,000. There are several other clips. Combined, it's considerably more. Elias looked at the gate across from him. A flight boarding, and people filing through the door in the ordinary way of people going places. I want to talk to the 2 prior passengers, he said. Not through a representative. Personally, a pause. That's going to require their contact information from the complaint records, Sylvia said. And I know. Pull it. And the other 45? All of them, Elias said. I want their contact information, and I want to reach out personally to every single one. Before the end of the week. Another pause. Longer this time? Yes, sir, Sylvia said. He ended the call, and he sat for a moment with the phone in his hand, and the noise of the terminal moving around him. People with places to be. Rolling bags and gate announcements, and the specific ambient sound of an airport that never fully goes quiet. And he thought about Dorothy from Cincinnati, who wrote in careful cursive and had almost not sent the complaint. Who had sat with it long enough to wonder if anyone was going to read it. Someone was going to read it. He already had, and now he was going to call her, and he made the second call. Renata Clark answered on the first ring, with the controlled energies of someone who had been sprinting in place for 3 hours and was managing it with professional precision. And, how bad? Elias said. Not bad, Renata said. Big, there's a difference. A pause while something beeped in the background. The story isn't framing the airline negatively right now. The framing is you specifically the way you stood there, and people are sharing the clip of you in the aisle and commenting about the stillness of it. One attorney with a large following posted something about it that got picked up widely. What did she say? And she said, let me find it. She said that what you were doing was the most controlled act of protest she had seen in years, and that it was strategic and deliberate, and that the restraint of it was the point. Elias said, it wasn't protest. It was a man standing in front of his seat. I know that, Renata said, and that's actually what's powerful about it. It wasn't anything except what it was, and he was quiet for a moment. I need a staff communication, he said. Internal. Goes to every Apex Airways employee before any press statement. I'm writing it myself, and I need you to coordinate the timing staff at 7 a.m. tomorrow. Press release 30 minutes after. A pause that contained Renata's professional restraint about the writing it himself part. Okay, she said, and I need a list of every press outlet that has reached out, and no comments until the staff communication goes out. Understood. He ended the call. The third call was the one he had been thinking about since somewhere over South Carolina. Noah answered before the second ring. And Dad. On the ground, Elias said, I know. I've been watching the flight tracker. A beat. There are like 500,000 people talking about you right now. I know. What are you going to do? Elias looked out the window at the tarmac, and at the planes at their gates, and the baggage carts moving in slow arcs, and the gray morning of New York coming through the glass. What I should have done 6 months ago, he said, and before the 47th complaint. Noah was quiet for a moment. I'm proud of you, he said. I wanted to say that. Not because of the CEO thing, because of the way you stood there. Elias held the phone, let the words sit. Go to class, he said. Noah laughed. Already there, and already went back. I'm in the back row with my phone under the desk. Put it away. Calling you back in 5 minutes. And Noah. Okay. Love you, Dad, love you. He sat for another minute after the call ended. Just sat. And in the noise and the light of the terminal, with 40,000 employees and 47 complaints, and a system that routed by crew member instead of by seat, and needed to be rebuilt from the inside out. Then he picked up his bag and stood up, and the Apex Airways offices were 2 miles from JFK. Elias arrived at 11:40 a.m. He walked through the lobby the way he always walked through it. No announcement, no production, just a man coming in from outside. The receptionist said good morning. He said it back, and his assistant Brenda met him at the elevator with a tablet and 3 printed documents and the look of someone who had been managing an unusual morning with the efficiency she applied to all mornings. HR is ready, she said. Communications team has the social metrics pulled, and your 4 o'clock with Mr. Whitmore has been confirmed. And the compliance team is standing by Ashley Grant first, Elias said, then Derek Okafor. 30 minutes between them. They're both in the building, I know. He walked to his office, sat at his desk, and did not look at the view. He considered it an indulgence he had to earn by doing the work first. He opened his laptop and pulled up the complaint database. All 47, and sorted by date. He read through the names again, the cities, the dates, the routes. He thought about what it had taken for each of those people to write something down, the specific decision involved in that, and the hope required to report something to the company responsible for it, and believe that the report would land somewhere real. He was going to make sure it did. He started writing, not the staff communication yet, something else, and a document he had been building in his head since before Flight 714. Since the first time he read the folder on his Atlanta desk and understood that the problem was not individual crew members making bad calls, and the problem was a system that made the bad call easy and the right call costly. He called it the dignity standard, not a rebrand, not a marketing initiative, and not a campaign with a logo and a rollout event and a press release that would be shared on social media and forgotten in 30 days. A set of operational requirements, built into the mechanism, non-optional. He wrote for 40 minutes, clear language, specific timelines, and no phrases like proactive culture shift, and no talking points. Just the thing he was going to build, and how and by when and who was responsible for each piece of it. When he finished the draft, he sent it to Sylvia and the HR director with a note, review for legal and operational viability, and I want to implement in 30 days. Tell me what's impossible and why. Then he called Brenda. Send in Ashley Grant. Ashley arrived at 12:15 p.m. She sat across from him without a union representative, which she had been offered and had declined, and she had her hands in her lap and was sitting in the way people sit when they are not trying to manage how they look. Tell me what happened, Elias said. Not the official version. What actually happened from your perspective. She looked at her hands briefly, then at him, and I saw someone I thought didn't belong there, she said, and I acted on that before I had any information, before I asked a single question, before I looked at anything, and she stopped. I made a decision about you in about 3 seconds, and then I spent 20 minutes defending the decision instead of examining it. What was the decision based on? She was quiet. What you were wearing, she said, the way you were standing, and the fact that you were alone and didn't have I don't know, didn't have whatever I was looking for. She paused, which I realize now I couldn't even define. I was looking for something that told me you belonged there, and I didn't find it because I wasn't actually looking, and I had already decided. Elias said, that's what bias looks like from the inside, not a plan, a reflex, a response so automatic you don't notice you're making it. Ashley nodded. And the training you've had, Elias said, didn't give you the tools to recognize that reflex when it was happening. That's a failure of our system. It is not an excuse for what you did. Both of those things are true. She looked up at him. What happens now? And she said, 90-day suspension, Elias said. Full pay. During those 90 days, you complete every module of the program we're launching. When you come back, if you come back, you're on a 12-month review period. Any passenger interaction that involves a boarding document not being verified, and, for any reason, and in any cabin, and your employment ends. And Ashley nodded. She had expected worse. I want to come back, she said. I know, Elias said. That's why the terms are what they are. And he paused. There were 2 other passengers before you. 2 other people on this route who were told to move from 1A without anyone verifying their documents. They didn't have what I had today. They just moved, and then they went home and wrote something down and sent it to us, and received a voucher for $200. Ashley's eyes moved, something shifting behind them. I want you to know that, Elias said. Not because you're responsible for what happened before you, and because understanding that you're part of a pattern is different from understanding that you made an individual mistake. The individual mistake is fixable. The pattern is what we're actually trying to address. She left. He sat for 10 minutes with the quiet of his office, and then called Brenda. Derek Okafor came in differently than Ashley had, and where Ashley had arrived contracted, careful with her space, Derek came in with the straightforward walk of a man who has already had the hardest conversation of the day, the one with himself, and has nothing left to brace for. And he sat down. Elias said you came back out of the galley. Before Diana arrived, you tried to look at the boarding pass. Ashley stopped me. I know, but you tried. Elias paused. That matters. Not enough, but it matters. Derek said nothing. Why did you go in the first place? And Derek looked at the table for a moment. Then directly at Elias. Because Carol Hutchins has 18 years of platinum status, and Ashley had already taken a position, and I calculated that getting in the middle of it was going to cost me more than staying out of it. And then you knew the calculation was wrong when you were making it. Yes, you've been on this airline 12 years, Elias said. You're good at your job. You know procedure better than most of the people who wrote it. Yes, and so you knew that what Ashley was doing, asking a passenger to move without verification, was a protocol violation. Yes, and you made a calculation about whether to address it. Yes, and Elias leaned forward slightly. Derek, I need you to understand something. Every time someone in your position makes that calculation and comes out on the wrong side, the cost doesn't disappear. It transfers. It gets paid by the passenger who moves, and by the person who goes to the back of the plane and sits there for 4 hours, and then goes home and writes something down on the off chance that anyone is going to read it. Derek looked at him steadily. And I know, he said. 2 people paid that cost on this route before today, Elias said. I have their names. I'm going to call them this week. Derek was quiet for a long moment. What happens to me, he said. Demotion to cabin support for 60 days, Elias said. And after that, if you want to come back to crew lead, there's a condition. He told Derek what the condition was. Derek sat with it, the way he had sat with things in the galley, not avoiding them, just taking the full weight of them before responding. And you want me to stand in front of the crew, Derek said, and tell them I walked away. I want you to lead the first 3 training sessions of the Dignity Standard program, Elias said, in front of your crew, talking about today, including what you did and why and what it cost. And why me? Because nobody in that room is going to believe someone they don't know telling them that bias is a problem, Elias said. And they might believe someone who stood inside a moment like this one, made the wrong choice, and is standing there 12 years into this job telling them what that felt like and why he did it and what he'd do differently. Derek looked at him. And that's harder than being fired, he said. I know, Elias said. That's the point. Firing you is easy. It makes the problem go away from one angle, and it doesn't change anything. I don't want to make the problem go away, and I want to change something. Derek sat with it one more time, then nodded. Once, deep and complete, the nod of a man accepting something he knows is right, even though it is not easy. Okay, he said. He stood, extended his hand. Elias shook it, and after Derek left, Elias sat at his desk and wrote. He wrote the staff communication, the one that would go to 40,000 people at 7 a.m. the next morning. And he wrote it the way his father had talked, plain language, no extra words, no phrases that sounded like policy and meant nothing. And he wrote about the 47 complaints. Did not name anyone. Described the pattern. Wrote about what a pattern meant, not a series of individual errors, but a system allowed to operate a certain way because not enough people had found it uncomfortable enough to change. And he wrote about Flight 714, about what had happened, about what it had confirmed. He wrote about the Dignity Standard, mandatory quarterly bias awareness training, not annual, not one time. Every quarter because habits do not change once. and they change or they return, and the only way to make them change reliably is to keep addressing them with the same regularity that the world keeps reinforcing them. Passenger interaction cameras in all first-class cabins, not punitive, and audit tools, reviewed monthly by an independent third party with no financial relationship to Apex Airways. An anonymous complaint line with a 48-hour human response guarantee, not automated, a person, every submission, and a passenger advocacy office, 6 people, full-time, whose only job was to review escalated complaints with the authority to act independently of the crew hierarchy, and reporting directly to him, and a change to the complaint routing system, and from routing by crew member to routing by incident type, by seat, and by route, and by any variable that might reveal a pattern that individual-level tracking would miss. And he wrote, "This is not a response to a viral video. It is a response to 47 people who took the time to tell us something was wrong. We owe them more than a voucher. We owe them a system that would have listened the first time." And he signed it, sent it to Brenda to hold until 7 a.m. Then he looked at the time, 3:47 p.m. He got up, made himself a coffee from the machine in the corner of his office that Brenda kept stocked, because she understood that certain things were not optional, and he drank it standing at the window, looking at the city going gray in the late afternoon. He thought about Noah, not because of the phone call or the pride in his voice, or the "I love you" from the back row of a class where he was hiding his phone under the desk. And he thought about Noah the way he often thought about him, as the most important evidence he had that the world he was trying to build was worth building, not for himself, and for the 19-year-old version of every person who would board a plane 30 years from now and expect, without having to hope for it, to sit down in the seat they had paid for. James Whitmore arrived at 4 o'clock exactly. He was still in the suit, and silver hair still precise. He sat down across from Elias with the composure of a man who has spent the afternoon building composure and has done a reasonable job of it. Elias said, 9 years on the board. Yes. And you were in the room 6 weeks ago when we reviewed the complaint summary. Yes. You voted for internal resolution. Us pause, yes. And you were on flight 714 this morning, and you recognized me within the first 10 seconds of my boarding. And yes, and you said nothing. No, Elias let that sit. Did not fill the space with the next sentence until the previous one had done what it needed to do. James, I don't want a board answer. I don't want something for the record. I want you to actually tell me why. And James looked at the window, then back. The looking away was not avoidance. There was the movement of a man searching for the honest version of something he had been telling himself, the comfortable version of all day. And I didn't want to be in the middle of it, he said. I told myself I didn't have full information. I told myself you would handle it. I told myself Carol was also a passenger, and it wasn't my place. A pause. Those were all true in a narrow technical sense, and none of them were the real reason. What was the real reason? I didn't want the scene, James said. I wanted to get from Atlanta to New York and read my emails and eat the breakfast they serve in first class and not be the person who caused a disruption. And he looked at Elias directly. And I knew who you were, which makes it worse, not better. Because I wasn't even in the position of a stranger who didn't know the situation. I knew, and I chose to make it someone else's problem. Elias nodded, and he reached into the folder on his desk and slid a piece of paper across. James looked at it. A resignation letter. Pre-drafted. From the chair of the board's Passenger Experience Committee. 4 years James had held that position, and 4 years of oversight of exactly the kind of system that had produced 47 complaints in 6 months. That's what you want to hand me, Elias said. I know that. It's the clean exit. And resign from the committee, take the consequence, put some distance between yourself and this morning. James looked at the letter, then at Elias. I'm not accepting it, Elias said. James frowned, not with relief, with something more complicated. And what I want, Elias said, is for you to stay on that committee. And I want you to personally lead the governance review of how we process passenger complaints. All 47. I want your name on the final report. Not a staff member, not a consultant. You. And then I want you in every meeting, every debrief, every conversation with every crew member and every passenger who filed a complaint and is willing to talk. That work is going to be visible, James said. The rest of the board. Know that you were on that plane and said nothing, Elias said. And yes, some of them already do. The video has been seen by most of the people in this building and a significant number of people outside it. He paused. Resigning from the committee doesn't change what happened this morning. It just means you get to stop thinking about it. And James looked at the resignation letter on the desk. You're asking me to stay in a room I don't deserve to be in, he said. I'm asking you to earn the right to be in it, Elias said. And, which is different. He leaned forward slightly. You've been on 7 boards, James. You've chaired committees. You've mentored people. You've done things that matter. This morning, you sat 40 feet away from something wrong and opened your laptop. He paused, and that can be the thing that defines what you do next. Or it can be the thing that drives what you do next. That's actually up to you. James sat with that. He picked up the resignation letter and looked at it one more time. Set it back down, face down on the desk. The way you set something down when you are deciding it is not the document you are signing today. All right, he said. 6 months, Elias said. Full review, every complaint, and you report directly to me, not through the governance committee. I want it independent. Understood. James stood. Elias stood. They shook hands across the desk. After James left, Elias sat alone in his office for a while, and not working, just sitting. He thought about what the day had been. Not the drama of it. The drama was the least interesting part. He thought about the texture of it, the specific way each person had made their choices and what those choices were built on. Ashley's reflex and Derek's calculation. James's 4 seconds of reasoning, Carol's certainty. None of them had woken up that morning intending to harm anyone. He believed that. He believed it genuinely, not as a diplomatic concession, but as a factual assessment of what he had observed. And that was the harder truth. Not that bad people did bad things, and that ordinary people, and operating inside ordinary systems, and with ordinary habits and ordinary assumptions, and produced harm without intending to, because the system had never asked them to look at what they were doing. And the dignity standard was not going to fix that entirely. He had no illusions about that. You could not rebuild in 30 days what had been built over 17 years. You could not change a reflex with a training module. And you could not make bias disappear by installing cameras. But you could change what was costly and what was easy. You could redesign the mechanism so that the easier choice was also the right one. And you could build accountability into the structure so that it did not depend on any individual person's willingness to do the hard thing in the moment. That was what structures were for. He got up from his desk, put on his coat, picked up his bag, and he had one more conversation before he went to the hotel. And Jordan Price was at a coffee stand near gate 34, and a cup in her hand and her coat over her arm, and the look of someone who had been processing a significant amount of information over the last several hours, and had arrived at something that needed a different kind of thinking, and she had agreed to meet him without asking why, and he had sent a brief message through the passenger contact system, explaining who he was, not that he was the CEO. She already knew that. The whole internet knew that, just that he wanted to speak with her before she boarded her connection. And she watched him approach with the particular alertness of someone in their final year of a communications degree who has spent 4 years studying exactly the kind of moment she was currently inside. They shook hands, sat down near the window. And, I'm not going to thank you for the video, Ayla said. She blinked. That was not what she had expected him to open with. Because you don't need my validation for it, he said. You made a judgment call based on what you were seeing, and it turned out to be the right call. But you made it before you knew how it was going to resolve. You made it because it seemed like the right thing to do in the moment. It was instinct, she said. I know. I'm not interested in the instinct. I'm interested in what you do with it. And she looked at him. You're going to have a lot of attention on this for a while, he said. The clip, your name attached to it. Interviews if you want them, and that's up to you. I'm not here to advise you on that. Then what are you here for, she said. Not rudely, directly, the way someone asks a question when they actually want the answer. And he said, I wanted to tell you something that isn't in the video and won't be in any of the coverage. She waited. The 2 passengers before today, he said. The ones who were told to move from 1A before I was. And they moved. They went to the back of the plane, or they got off, or they changed their flights. And then they went home and they wrote something down, and they sent it to us, and they got a $200 voucher. He paused. Nobody filmed them. Nobody shared anything. And nobody had 400,000 views of what happened to them. They just experienced it and reported it, and the report went into a routing system that wasn't designed to find the pattern it was part of. And Jordan was quiet. The video mattered, Elias said. I'm not saying it didn't, but the video mattered because of what was already there. Because of 47 people who bothered to write something down. The video just made it visible. She looked at her coffee cup. And I've been thinking about my thesis, she said. About the gap between what gets recorded and what gets believed. About who gets to have their experience confirmed by evidence and who just has to be believed on their word. And what are you finding? That the evidence doesn't actually change who gets believed, she said. People who were already inclined to believe it see the video and say, yes, this is what I knew. People who weren't inclined to believe it find reasons to discount the video. She paused, and what changes is the scale. More people see it, the conversation gets louder, but the underlying belief structure
stay the same.
Elias said. Yeah, he nodded. That's why the dignity standard isn't a communication campaign. And if I announce this and do a press conference and put it on the website, the people who were already inclined to believe the problem exists will feel validated. The people who weren't won't be persuaded. He paused, but if I change the routing system so complaints are tracked by pattern instead of by individual crew member, that happens whether or not anyone believes the problem exists. The structure doesn't require belief. It just requires compliance. And Jordan looked at him with the expression of someone who has just heard a thesis argument made better than she made it herself. And, can I quote you on that? She said. For the thesis? For the thesis. He said, the story doesn't end when the video ends. That's the thing I actually want you to know. The story ends when something changes. The video is visible. And the change is slow and procedural, and not particularly cinematic. But the change is the part that matters. Jordan looked at him for a long moment. Then she took out her phone and typed something, and showed him the screen. The story ends when something changes. First line of the conclusion, she said. He stood, she stood. They shook hands again. Good luck with the thesis, he said, and meant it the way you mean something when you have read 4 years of someone's formation in one afternoon's conversation. She watched him walk away down the terminal, not the way you watch a famous person or a powerful person, and the way you watch someone who has just given you the piece of an argument you did not know you were missing. And she sat back down, opened her laptop, looked at the blank document she had opened on the plane and typed one line into. She started writing. The dignity standard launched 31 days later, not with a press conference, and not with a keynote or a launch event or a social media campaign with a branded hashtag. Elias had specifically refused all of those. A press conference said we are performing accountability. What he was doing was not a performance. It launched at 7 a.m. with an email to 40,000 Apex Airways employees. Plain language. What had happened, what was changing, why, the timeline, the specific operational requirements, the name of the independent third party doing the monthly camera reviews, and the direct number for the passenger advocacy office. And simultaneously, in a training room at JFK, with 43 crew members in the seats, Derek Okafor stood at the front of the room and said the words he had been preparing for 31 days. And I'm going to tell you about the worst decision I made in 12 years on this airline. He talked for 40 minutes. He talked about the morning of Flight 714, about what he had seen from the gaggly doorway, and about the calculation he had made, not an unconscious one, a deliberate one, the kind of choice you can dress up in reasons, but cannot actually pretend you were not making. He talked about 12 years of similar calculations, and smaller ones, and the accumulated weight of all those choices, and none of them dramatic, and none of them singular, and adding up to a habit of looking away. And he talks about sitting across from Elias Webb in an office in this building and hearing 7 words. You didn't pay it. Someone else did. The room was quiet, not the forced quiet of people waiting for the presenter to finish, and the quiet of people listening too hard to make any other sound. A crew member in the 3rd row raised her hand. And, has this happened to you? She said. Not on the job, just to you personally. Derek said yes. She said, what did it feel like? He said, like standing somewhere you had every right to stand and having the room treat the right as the problem. He paused, and, like holding a ticket and being told the ticket was wrong, not because anyone checked it, because someone's decided. The room stayed quiet. Another hand went up, and then another. The 40 minutes became 90. Derek answered every question with the same plainness he had brought to Elias's office, not managing the answers, not shaping them toward a particular outcome, just saying what was true. And after the session, a flight attendant who had been with Apex for 8 years stopped Derek on the way out. "I did what you did," she said, quietly, not constating, "last year. Different flight. I saw something and I went in the back," and Derek looked at her. "Come back for the second session," he said. "You can talk about it if you want, or you can just listen. Either way." She came back for the second session. She came back for the third. And 3 months after Flight 714, Elias took Flight 714 again. Same route, Atlanta to New York, same 7:20 a.m. departure time. He booked his seat the same way, E-Web, no designation, navy hoodie this time, dark jeans, and his father's watch. He took a rideshare to the airport and stood in the regular security line and put his shoes in the gray bin. The first-class cabin had a new crew, nobody from the morning of the original flight, and he boarded in the priority lane and walked down the jetway and turned the corner. Seat 1A was empty. He sat down, and the flight attendant, a man in his mid-30s, new to this route, who had completed the first module of the Dignity Standard 6 weeks ago in a training room in Atlanta, came by with pre-departure water and set it down on the armrest. "Good morning, sir. Can I get you anything before we push back?" "Not, sir. May I see your confirmation?" "Not, sir. This section is for just good morning and a question and water on the armrest." Elias said, "I'm fine, thank you." And the flight attendant nodded and moved to the next row. Elias looked out the window. He thought about Ashley Grant, who was 3 weeks from returning to active duty, and who had sent him a letter, not an email, and a letter, and written by hand that said in part, "I understand now what I was doing and why I was wrong, and I understand that understanding it doesn't undo it. But I'm going to do this job differently." He had read the letter twice and written back 1 paragraph and meant every word of it, and he thought about Derek, who had led 6 sessions and had another 6 scheduled, and had told Elias in their last conversation that the hardest part was not talking about what he had done. The hardest part was watching people in the room recognize themselves in it, and watching the moment when someone understood that they had made the same calculation. And that's the part that costs something, Derek had said. And I think that's the part that does something too. He thought about James Whitmore, 3 months into the governance review. 96 pages so far. 41 of the 47 complaints reviewed in detail. He had called Elias twice with findings not to report, to think out loud, the way a person thinks out loud when they are inside something difficult, and do not want to be less inside it than they are. And Elias had taken both calls. He was going to take the next one. He thought about Carol Hutchins. He did not know what Carol Hutchins had done with the morning of Flight 714, and he had no information about her life after she walked through the boarding door at JFK. He had not sought it. What Carol Hutchins did next was not his to know. He hoped she did something with it. He genuinely hoped that. Not for his sake. For hers. And because the alternative, carrying what she now knew about herself and setting it down somewhere manageable and going back to the way things were, was a heavier thing to carry than it seemed. But he did not know, and it was not his to know. He thought about Dorothy from Cincinnati, and he had called her on a Wednesday evening, 3 weeks after the flight. She had answered on the 3rd ring. Her voice careful the way voices are careful when an unknown number calls at an unexpected time. And when he told her who he was, she was quiet for a long moment. "I wasn't sure anyone read it," she said. "I read it," he said, "and I want you to know what happened because of it." He told her about the Dignity Standard, about the routing system change, about the advocacy office, and about Derek's training sessions. He did not oversell it. He told her what it was and what he believed it would do, and where it would fall short, and what he was still figuring out, and she listened to all of it. When he finished, she said, "I almost didn't send it." "I know," he said. "I'm glad you did. I just wanted to sit down," she said. And then she laughed, short and real, the laugh of someone who has said something that was devastating when she first wrote it and is now able to hear it differently because something has shifted. That's all it was. "I just wanted to sit down. And you should have been able to," he said. "And I'm sorry you couldn't." A pause. "Thank you for calling," Dorothy said. I didn't think I'd ever hear from anyone." And he thought about that conversation now, and looking out the window of Flight 714, seat 1A, and Atlanta going small below him. And you didn't think you'd ever hear from anyone. 47 people who had thought that, who had written something down anyway, in the face of that expectation because they needed the record to exist, even if no one read it. And he was going to make sure that the next person had a different expectation, that the system waiting for their complaint was built to find them, to see the pattern, to respond with something more than a voucher and a form letter. And that was what the 47 complaints were actually asking for. Not revenge, not headlines. Just the thing Dorothy had named. They just wanted to sit down. He watched Atlanta dissolve into cloud below the plane. He thought about his father and about Gracio Avenue, about a 14-year-old kid standing in a shoe store with a sneaker he had only been looking at, setting it down carefully because he knew hands were watching, about a sidewalk, one hand on the back of his neck, one sentence, "Don't let them see you run." And he had not run. He had stood in an aisle for 20 minutes with a boarding pass and a specific kind of stillness that was not resignation and was not passivity and was not the performance of calm for the benefit of the people watching. And it was the real thing. The thing you build over years of understanding that the anger you are entitled to and the use you put the anger to are two different decisions, and the second one is the only one that builds anything. The clouds went white and flat outside the window, and the engine settled into the steady sound of cruising altitude. Elias looked at the seat under him, the armrest, the oval window, and the ordinary materials of a first-class cabin on a domestic flight, the same materials that had been here 3 months ago when he stood in the aisle in a gray hoodie and held his ground and waited for the truth to catch up to the room. And he was not waiting for anything now. He was just sitting in seat 1A of Flight 714. A man in a navy hoodie with a watch his father had left him, going from one city to another, not proving anything, not performing anything, and not needing the room to look at him and make a decision about where he belonged. He belonged. He had always belonged. And the work, the slow and procedural and unglamorous and necessary work of making that true for everyone who came after him was already underway. And it would keep going, long after the video was forgotten, long after the hashtags had moved on to the next thing, long after the drama of that morning had faded into the background of ordinary days. The work would keep going, because that was what work did, and you did not do it for the moment when it became visible, and you did it for the moment. And 3 months later, and on an ordinary Tuesday morning, and when a flight attendant set a glass of water on the armrest and said good morning and moved on to the next row, and nobody in the cabin thought anything of it at all. End of part 3, end of seat 1A, the weight of silence.